Okay, today I have two very special guests. I actually got contacted by a PR firm that represents them with some information. I went out and checked it out, and I got pretty excited. I got excited because these are two people that you've probably heard of. One is Jesse Carmichael, who's a keyboardist, guitarist, and vocalist with Maroon 5. The other is Jason Lader, who's got a list of production and engineering and programming credits as long as my driveway. These two guys have come together and done and released an EP under the name The Circuit Jerks. And the way it was presented to me was that here's a band that's focused on modular synthesizers and doing some interesting stuff. So I listened to the record, and it started off with kind of a very funky, weird, chip-tuney remix of a Maroon 5 tune, and then a kind of another standard remix, and then it sort of took off into left field. There's a remix of Aquila do Brasil by Ari Barroso, which was just ridiculously fun. And then, inexplicably, there are two 1 hour long form sort of ambient pieces that were just mesmerizing. And so given what I heard, I really wanted to talk to these guys, talk about how they came up with the idea for this release and how their collaboration works. So with that, I'm going to say hi to Jesse Carmichael. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. And hi to Jason Lader.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk. Now, I'm going to start off, first of all, with you, Jesse. You obviously have a long history doing the work with Maroon 5. I noticed that you did some studying of music, but I'm curious what caused you to kind of take a break from working on the really straight stuff to do some, what I would consider kind of very experimental stuff with this Circuit Jerks project.
Well, I love all kinds of music, so it doesn't feel like a stretch to go into different realms. And I got introduced to the modular synth by Jason Lader back in 2005 when he was helping us make our second album with Maroon 5. He brought a modular synth up to the Houdini mansion in Laurel Canyon where we were recording, and I was interested in it, but it didn't really catch with me until years later. And Jason was building up his modular synth library along with some other friends of ours, and I just suddenly got interested in it again and started putting together my own rig, and we started making music together, and it naturally led to the first remix we did for Maps.
Interesting. Yeah, and of the stuff on the release, that was probably the most straightforward remix. After that, though, then you did the remix of This Summer, which I happened to check out on YouTube, and it really kind of threw a lot of people for a loop because they weren't expecting something as aggressive as that. And so, was this a chance for you to sort of like stretch your legs into a kind of new possibilities, or were you actually trying to like kind of push the fans a little bit?
I think it was just something we were doing to have fun. We didn't have any intentions of trying to push people's ears in a certain direction. It was just what was naturally sounding cool to us.
Sure. Okay, Jason, I want to talk with you a little bit about this. Since you started in 2005, the modular world wasn't quite the utopia of gear that is now. It was relatively few manufacturers developing relatively few systems. What was it about the modular at the time that really drew you in?
I was always into synthesizers, and, you know, when you're a kid, you see all the pictures of modulars, and it's the fantasy, watching Phantom of the Paradise and seeing Toto and
right.
Tonto, and, all the pictures of, I was really into Pink Floyd, so you see all the pictures of the VCF3s, and we were really into Moogs and stuff, so I think there reached a point where, I guess, also, so then at that point, Radiohead, like, Johnny started using a lot of modular stuff.
Right.
And so I got turned through him. It was like I started seeing pictures of the analog system stuff, and I was intrigued to get a system, and there's a place out here called Analog Haven. At the time, they were in Pomona, so I drove out there one day and bought my first starter system, which, as you say, you know, things were more basic back then. It was really just kind of a modern version of the classic modular, you know, it was all very traditional synthesizer modules.
Right.
Which was cool, but it wasn't what it is now, which, you know, fast forward 10 years later, and all these new, more interesting modules came out, a lot more experimental stuff. So that's when I really dove in and really started building my system up.
Well, so what are the things that are kind of like the hallmark pieces of modular gear that you use? What are the things that you go to every time?
I mean, I use everything that I have. I've like the system that I have is, you know, everything. I don't think there's anything I don't use. And in fact, it's funny because the size of the system I have now, I thought like, okay, this is going to be good for me for a while. But then I was on a session last month, and I borrowed my friend Chris's system, which is about the same size as mine, so it's basically double.
Right.
And I loved having that, like, just that much more stuff, and having doubles and modules I really like. I mean, modules that I love are like the make noise stuff, the Phonogene,
right,
the Rene sequencer. I love probably my favorite module at the moment is the Cloud.
Oh yeah.
Mutable instruments. I love that one. I love all the mutable stuff. I love all the make noise stuff. I love the ModCam stuff, which sadly they're not making anymore.
Right.
Like the dual delay I use a lot, the quad LFO. I mean, you know, and it's like you can't, it's funny because those are like the important sonic modules, but then it's like there's so many building blocks that you couldn't live without, like all the basic stuff, you know, all the CV stuff and all the utility stuff is such a huge part of it, you know.
Yeah, I almost hesitate to talk about, you know, what's a favorite module, because in a real modular system, you need about 4 modules to make everyone work, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's all about all of it. It's not like there's one. Like there's been times for sessions where I was like, oh, can I just pare it down to like a few? And I can't really, because it's like it's all about just having all the options and just getting patches of unexpected things together. And the whole thing about the complexity of the modules now is there's like endless discovery. A module like Intelligent Shapeshifter, there's so many layers to it, and you're always uncovering new sounds in it and new ways of using it. You know, same with the Clouds, with the Parasites mode, like all the Parasites firmware, there's all these different modes, so you start discovering all these new sounds.
Right.
And that to me is what's so much more interesting about it now, as opposed to before when it was more just traditional synthesis. Now it's like it's so much more complex and so much more interesting.
So Jesse, what does your modular rig look like? What kind of setup do you have?
I got something similar to Jason. I just started to add some more video modules into my rig from LZX, and I'm excited about getting into that. I want to talk more about your video piece that you made and how you did it. Will you tell us about that for a little bit?
Well, so for the listeners, I kind of always have a couple of ideas sort of in the back of my head that I'm working on in terms of trying to do video stuff. I try and develop like video concepts. When I was listening to this EP, the nice thing about the EP1 is that it's got these very long form pieces, the last 2 pieces, Modfire and
Spring.
Yeah. And but Modfire, I put it on, and I was just like, oh man, this reminds me a lot, kind of the repetition, but the not exact repetition of it reminded me of this piece I'd been working on. So I like jumped into it. I work with Macs all the time, right? I basically pulled out one of these patches that I'd been working on, and just listening to that and sort of like the way that kind of caught my brain got me into a very specific part of the patch that I was like, oh, if I just tweak this, it'll do the right thing. And all of a sudden it just kind of blossomed. And it was one of those things that I love when I'm working with video and audio simultaneously. Your brain really tries hard to like make the two match up, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it was really great to then see this thing that kind of moved in a way
Wow.
that my brain was quickly attaching to parts of the music.
Cool.
And that's always like a really good sign when that happens, right?
That's nice.
Now I'm interested though to think about what you might be doing with some of that LZX stuff. I've had a chance to play with it a couple of times. I don't own any myself, but I've had a chance to play with them, and it is a completely mind-bending way of working with visuals.
I was going to say, I have a piece from there. It's called the sensory translator, and that allows you to take certain frequencies and plug them into the visual cortex, and then whatever's showing up on the projector screen will react to the sound that's in that frequency range. If you put it low and there's a kick drum happening, then every time the kick drum happens, there'll be a ripple of color and lines across the image that's being projected. So I like what you're saying about how you're looking for these connections, and it's one of my favorite things too, is seeing images react to sound in real time.
Right. And what's fun is especially with the analog stuff, I think very similar to the way the analog audio works, the analog video has some really unique characteristics in that it isn't always 100% pure. Mm-hmm. And there's something about that lack of purity that makes it seem like it connects to our humanness more in some way, and I've just always really liked that.
Yeah, the other day, Jason and I were watching Frank Ocean's first video for Nikes,
right.
And we had Flux turned on the laptop, and it's that program that turns the blue light off and accentuates the orange hue
right.
at night. But it introduces all these artifacts into the video that aren't necessarily there. But I didn't know that at the time, and I just thought that was like some cool video art stuff.
That's awesome.
So yeah, for whatever reason, I think I am definitely, Jason as well, probably a lot of us are probably just drawn to things that look fucked up in some way.
Right.
I don't know what that means, certain love of abnormality.
Yeah, or it's just more complexity, interesting things you've never seen or heard before,
Right,
mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm curious about how you guys collaborate, because first of all, Jesse, you're touring a lot. Jason, you have got to be going from studio to studio constantly. It's hard to imagine actually having the time to be able to put together a collaboration like this. What is sort of like the way that you manufacture the work?
Well, we both have enough downtime to work on our own music and work on other stuff. So usually we get together, usually at Jesse's house in Los Angeles, because we all live here. Mm-hmm. Just so you know, there's a ghost member who's not part of this interview.
Okay.
The group started with four of us. One of the other members and his name's Andrew Schetz, and he's also a very successul mixer, engineer,
right. Yes.
Producer in his own right. And so he was part of it. He actually probably still has the biggest system of all this, but he wound up moving to England. So that space was too much. And
right.
So, and then there's another member who is in another band that is like contractually obligated in a way. So he's basically a ghost member.
Right.
He shall remain unnamed. So, but he also, he's deep into the modular. He has a really great system. Anyway, so we all get together at Jesse's house, and whatever project, if it's a remix, we'll start, with the remix. We've also been doing some shows. A friend of ours started doing an ambient music night in Los Angeles, and so we've done 3 shows thus far.
Okay.
And it's just basically improv, ambient, like we just we go with our 3 modular systems and play for crowds. We've done some rehearsals for that stuff. So yeah, we just, we just make the time, and, it's fun. And then usually there's some goal in mind when we get together, some project, that either it's a remix or one of these shows. That's usually what's gotten us together
sure.
thus far. Though coming in the future, Jesse is just finishing building a really beautiful recording studio in his house, so I'm sure there will be more creative, just like, off the cuff things happening, and some more projects, some more stuff to release. So
sure. So when you either do these get together sessions or when you play live, do you have like a reduced version of your synth that you take with you, or do you take the whole rig?
No, we take it all.
Okay.
And that's what's got me thinking about the future of like online streaming audio and video concerts. And I'm wondering how we could link up our systems with clock over distance,
right,
so that we're all connected. It's got to be some Ethernet way to do that, yeah?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's just there inevitably is some sort of latency over online, so there's going to be, it would never be able to be perfectly in time. Well, actually, though, if you had clock generated from the web and we were all getting clock and not without, like, if someone wasn't generating clock or getting clock, we might be able to get it in sync somehow.
That'd be an interesting website to develop, like a clock-generating website for people.
Oh, that's a great idea, yeah.
Link up.
Oh, my God.
Have you guys played around with Ableton's Link system yet?
Yeah, it's great. It's amazing. And I've just had I went to the AES show last week in LA.
Yeah.
Audio Engineering Society. And a friend of mine, Leggy, and a mixer engineer I know out here, we've been having very lengthy discussions about, because we all use multiple systems. Like, I use Pro Tools, I use Ableton, I use Logic. He uses Logic and Pro Tools, Cubase, and so there's always this thing about, like, in this day and age with all the technology, why don't these things talk to each other better? Like, Rewire was great, but Rewire's like 20 years old now.
Well, and it seems so fragile.
Yeah, and it's very fragile. And it's very strange because, to me, like, I know probably a lot of it was out of fear of like companies not want, like, they want to be their users exclusive. But to me, the way people work now, like, everybody likes different parts of every software, and software's gotten for the most part more affordable. So to me, if they made it easier to use together, I think more people would just be like, cool, I'll have Pro Tools and Logic and Ableton, I'll use them all at the same time because I like that drum machine, I like that sampler. But instead, they're making it difficult. And so people have to stay more exclusive because it's such a hassle to use multiple things. Right. And so, like, the Link thing, which I've just read now has become open source. Yeah. I read that the other day, is amazing. And I'm hoping that, like, I know Reason just picked up on it, so I'm hoping that Pro Tools and Logic, I hope more people pick up on that, because that's a great, I've used it in the studio, and it's such a great way of collaborating.
Right. I know Ableton's been really great at kind of evangelizing that as sort of like a timing system. Yeah. I know at Cycling 74, we just got done with, we're just finishing up a development run that's specifically oriented towards supporting Link. And so, if that could work, the other thing is, though, it still is kind of oriented towards everyone being on the same, like, local network. It would be nice if that would, like, extend out to the whole internet so that you could do something like your centralized website that everyone logs into and works off of. That would be pretty amazing. Right.
But, like, I hope that catches on, because the fact that you can't just go between systems and all of it's crazy. Like, that should just exist.
Yeah,
such
absolutely.
a no-brainer.
Right.
I've been really intrigued by Max MSP for a long time, though. I've never had the luxury of really learning. I took 2 weeks once and, like, watched a lot of YouTube videos and spent some time with it, but never got deep enough. And I would love to learn Max MSP. Do you have a modular system?
I do. I used to have a much larger modular system, but for me, I found that for myself, I prefer live performance to recording. Mm-hmm. And so what I ended up doing was like getting hyper focused on a small portable system. So I have one of these little tip-top fold open cases.
Yeah.
And I said I'm gonna find a way to do what I want with a laptop and one of those and a controller, right? Yeah, I've got this thing. It's actually like 2.5 voices of synthesis, and then I have it kind of talking back and forth to my laptop a lot. I sometimes I use the Mutable Instruments yarns for CV to MIDI,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
sometimes I use either the Monome button interface, or else I'll use the Expert Sleepers so I can control it more easily between stuff. So I swap things in and out, but really I limit myself to this one small case so that it's very easy for me to travel.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, it means that there are certain, like, I love the Phone Machine module as well, but it's so big that it's really impractical to put it in a small case, right? And so as much as I love it, I instead wrote sort of the equivalent in Max so I could at least have something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things where there are limits that come with having a small system, and not all of those limits are great.
Well, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes the limitation is good, though, right? You're, like, forced to use things in different ways, so.
What I find was that with a really limited system, what it means is that I more often will explore, like, the weirdo edges of different modules. Because if I have a huge wall of modules, I kind of do what each module does best, right?
Right.
But if I have a really small collection, I'm just sort of like, well, this thing doesn't do FM that well, but you know what? It kind of has this quirky thing way on the edge, so I'm going to play with that for a while, and that's kind of a nice way to go.
Yeah, I feel you, and that's why I was trying to keep my system to what I have now. Right. But then I had that experience with borrowing my friends, and I was like, oh, man.
Yeah, the double up will always kill you.
I don't think there's any doubt. Jason later is definitely going to end up in a room that's filled, all four walls covered with modulars.
It's funny. I
was
just working on a record. It's actually not modular at all, but it's an acoustic record with artist Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins.
Right.
And I had my modular set up in the control room at the time. He walks in and he's like, "Oh, I've got some of that stuff." I was like, "Oh, you do? Oh, cool." Yeah. He's like, I kind of got a bunch of it.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I snuck off on my phone and Googled Billy Corgan modular and was like, "Oh my god!" So I don't know if you've seen his system.
Yeah, you see him in front of that huge wall-sized thing that he has.
The wall.
It's insane.
So I'll wind up there someday. Maybe that's the singularity that Kurzweil was talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask a little bit. Let me go back to the EP, because I am curious about one thing. These two long form. First of all, it must have drove a record company crazy to have you walk in with 2-hour-long pieces and say, "Here's part of our EP." Did they give you any crap about that?
No, they were cool with it, and iTunes doesn't care either. And
right.
It was just, we're all into kind of interesting esoteric ideas, and both of those pieces are 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 11 seconds exactly. Right. So it's good for our first EP1 that number was repeated a bunch. Maybe the next EP will have a bunch of 2 hour, 22 minute, and 22 second long pieces.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that. That sounds cool.
I've been doing a lot of, those are actually short. I've been doing a lot of 2 to 3 hour long pieces that I have up on my own personal SoundCloud that I've been experimenting with. I think it's nice when you could put on a piece of music, I think we're both thinking this, you could put on something and just have it. It's becomes environmental in a sense,
Right.
It's just and kind of the longer it is, you just forget about it and it just stays on. It creates a mood,
Well, and especially in both of those cases, there's these repeating figures, but there's also over time there's modulation, whether it's a change in the noise floor or the change of the structure of the tone or whatever.
Yeah.
There are these long form changes but short term repetitions, and I think that has a real particular thing that it does to our brain, which is it puts us into sort of a working rhythm that aligns with that in some way.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And, I know for myself, when I jumped into working with this Mac stuff, then, I really found myself, changing LFOs to sort of, match some of the timings and stuff like that. I think that's really great. I'm curious, what is it? It's one thing for me to listen to it and align with it. It's another thing to make the decisions to say, here's what kind of thing we're doing. What was the determinant for how long these looped sections were? Were you using tape loops? Were you using the phonogene? Were you using something that sort of limited the time frames? Or was it just like, this is what my gut tells me should work?
I think for us, it's like on these long pieces, it's more about creating systems, and there's no, like, bring back probably a loop and phonogene, but that's being modulated in many random ways so that it never really repeats.
What it means is that you didn't overthink it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's never really thought out. It's just like kind of patching in things until you find something you like, and then again, for the long pieces, it's like just changing things really slowly over time.
Right.
Like letting things go, and then, after 10 minutes, turning a knob a little bit, nothing drastic. And then the thing, kind of to the last question, it's like, I'm surprised, given our new medium, which, we used to be limited by, what an LP could hold or what a cassette could hold, and then after that, a CD.
Right.
And now with this new sort of streaming medium, it's relatively new. It's only in the last probably 5 or 10 years, and even now it's like really just that you can have it everywhere. It's like amazing to me that people are still limited to these like 3-minute songs or 40-minute records. It's like, why not explore like what's available with more lengthy? It's like there's no limit to what you can do now.
Yeah, that starts to get us into the like Long Now Foundation territory with those epic, year-long works.
Right, exactly.
It's exciting stuff. And that's where I think AI is going to come into play, because if we can start brain mapping our brains to have computers make music with our neurological processes, that'll be really interesting.
Dude, it used to be that this long form stuff, it was really the only time you could ever experience it was if you went to a live show. I remember when I was much younger, I went to a Robert Rich show, and he used to do these things, he'd call them sleep concerts.
Oh, yeah.
And you would come with your sleeping bag, and he would start at like 10 o'clock at night, and he would finish at 9 the next morning, all one enormous long piece.
Max Richter's been doing that as well the last year.
Right. That kind of concept's coming back. But what's interesting, as you pointed out, now all of a sudden we actually have a distribution medium that conceivably allows us to send these things out. It's just everybody's still stuck on the single format in 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, totally. Very strange. Hopefully that will slowly change over the next little bit of time.
Yeah, I agree.
I think as radio becomes less important, which it kind of is in a lot of ways, that will happen.
What I'm imagining right now is a technology that would allow somebody while they're asleep to be hooked up to some sort of brain mechanism that would allow them to control the music from within their lucid dream.
That's where you're going to really find out who is creative and who just dreams about like driving to work every day or whatever, right?
Right, exactly.
Where you said you like playing live? Are you doing modular shows then?
I am, although I just recently moved I used to live up in the mountains outside of Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, cool.
And I just recently moved here to Minneapolis, so I just kind of have to reestablish new connections and stuff to start playing again.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of times, if I do shows, they would be kind of in conjunction with workshops or something, because people loved having the opportunity to kind of check out Max and stuff too. Because it's funny, because Max has been around for 20 years, but it's almost like people are just now wrapping their heads around what they might be able to do with it, right?
But it's almost like pop, like even pop music in a sense now is coming more around to what Max can do. It's like, the way electronic music has taken over.
Yeah.
So things like modular synths and Max MSP, like everyone's looking for that interesting different sound. And, it used to be pedals on guitars or some new synthesizer, some new keyboard, and now it's getting more extreme. I think it's things like Max MSP and modular synths, because everybody else is just using presets on, their synths in Ableton or Logic or whatever. So to get different things, you're having to go to these more extreme boundaries. So I think people are more interested. And then, like you said, you have guys like Johnny Greenwood who are like using Max MSP and modular synths publicly. So it's bringing those things to the forefront.
I actually think that it's sort of like this multi-headed beast and it's like a combination of where pop music is going, but also where movie soundtracks are going, and also the kind of soundtracks behind commercials. All of these things are taking sound design and pushing it to the front. It used to be everybody was trying to get a better Fender Rhodes sound than someone else, or a better 808 kick drum, and now it's like, who can do the most extreme drop? Or who can just like poke your eyes out with an amazing bass track or something, This like pushing forward of sound design is kind of really interesting. Now, I'm curious, is that one of the reasons that you both gravitate towards modular synth? Because there is sort of like no equivalent of a preset. And so is that what draws you into the modular synth thing?
Yeah, I think it's like you hear these sounds that you get things that you would never get any other way. For some reason, for me, software, and I would think maybe Max MSP or something like Reactor might lend more to this, but for some reason, like in the computer or on hardwired synths, it's like things are just very predictable. It's like kind of know what you're going to get. And with modulars, I just find the accident factor very high, and so you just you just turn something on and plug something in. Like sometimes I'll have my modular off and it'll have been patched from whatever I left it, but for some reason I'll turn it on. It's like a totally different thing, and it's like the most amazing sound you've ever heard.
Right.
And so it's the random factor, I think, that comes into play, which you don't necessarily get with computers. I mean, can you get that with something like Max MSP? Does that lend itself more to that?
It can. Again, for me, and I just can only talk about myself. I think every person approaches these things differently. But I work with Max very similar to the way that I work with my modular. I always start my modular. I practically always start with it completely unplugged.
Right.
And likewise with Max, I normally start with a blank screen and I start adding stuff, because that process of adding stuff, the track I take tends to develop, it tends to be like my feelings at the time tend to come out in the patch, right?
Right.
And that's what I find about developing patches. How about you guys? What do you, like, Jesse, what is your process? What do you do? Do you start from scratch, or do you have like a patch that you use and then you spend more of your time tweaking?
Yeah, I usually start from scratch as well, and I'm still in the process of spending time learning each module. So I'll just do little experimentation phases where I work with 3 modules, let's say, and just really dig into what the capabilities are of each of these modules and explore the sounds of the different waveforms and then see what happens from there.
Yeah, that seems like a really great way to do it too, because rather than just learning one module, if you're doing with 3, you actually learn like how 2 modules can affect each other and kind of feed back on each other. That seems like a pretty fun way to do it.
So yeah, for me it's the same thing, but there's definitely modules that I've had to spend, just a day, like 2 or 3 days alone with, like, the shapeshifter was one of those modules. There's so many layers to it. Renee was one of those modules. Every module, like the modules as they get more complex, it's like you actually have to sit down and really spend time. There's YouTube videos that go through just to learn everything about it. Otherwise, you're limiting yourself because you don't really know what it does. But,
right.
Obviously a module like Rennie you have to use with something else because it doesn't produce sound. So you want to understand what it's doing. So, but yeah, I definitely find, and then like an instrument, it's interesting that I find, like, if I'm away from my modular for like a few weeks because I'm working on other stuff, when I come back to it, I feel totally out of practice. It's like if you don't play piano it's like, you seriously forget. You're like, like if you sat down with a module and spent time learning it, like the shapeshifter, but then don't use it for a month, you forget a lot of what you spent the time. It's like you have to be using these. Like the modular thing really takes practice. I'm sure the same as, like, I mean, it's really like any software or anything you use a lot. Like you just have to keep at it. But the modular especially, it's like you get out of practice and then it's like kind of rusty.
Yeah, what I know for myself, one of the things that happens is if I'm away from it a while, when I come back to it, I make really stupid, like, mini Moog patches, right? Exactly, I'm like, oh man, I'm not even taking advantage of what this thing really can do, because it's like I've somehow lost the touch. And you're right, it takes a while to get that back.
Like you have to stay on it. Do you have a favorite module or something you're into right now?
You know, it comes and goes. Actually, on my blog lately, I've been talking about this weird $90 module called by Doepfer called the A185-2. That's an exciting name, right? Yeah. And all it is it's a little adder, but it allows you to take all different kinds of voltages and add them together, but do it in a way that still maintains the pitch properly.
Oh wow.
And so what I've been doing is doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff with pitch modulation. And it's something that in the past, modular, you tend to either ignore the pitch and just let it do its random shit, right? Or else you like hook it up with MIDI CV and then you tune it and you try and keep it in place. Yeah. I've been playing in the middle, and I've been using this little A185-2, and I've been having a ton of fun. But it's sort of like that's my passion for this month. And next month it's going to be the maths, or it's going to be something else. I'm a big fan of make noise stuff, and I'm a big fan of IntelliGel stuff. And so I have a lot of those modules in my system.
But that's interesting. Like that's what I was saying earlier. It's like I think people like everyone's like, oh, I love the bigger. I don't even know how to say it, but just the more obvious modules. But it's like those weird little like utility modules, like the one you're talking about. Like Doepfer makes so many of those that I think go kind of unnoticed general by people with small systems, because that's not what they get. They get the stuff they need. But then there's all these really cool little things like sort of go unnoticed.
Right. Well, especially the Doepfer stuff, because it doesn't have cool screen graphics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
People tend to look at it like it's kind of blah. But man, some of those modules can really wake up your system.
Totally. Exactly. They really, really wake up your system a lot. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of Doepfer stuff, like weird little switches and delay things. Not audio delay, but like trigger delays and things like that I use all the time. Oh, the one that I'm talking about is the A162, the ratcheting controller.
Right. Oh, that's fun. Well, and also all those little Doepfer switches and stuff, there are so many ways you can have fun with that. It's outrageous, yeah. Well, guys, our time is up. I thank you so much for taking the time, and you got me rolling there, because I can talk about modular stuff from now till the end of time. And luckily there's a lot to talk about. But I appreciate you chatting. When's your next release going to come out? Because I really enjoyed this one.
Not really sure yet.
Yeah, we'll see what happens
And that's the sound of the band's manager hanging up on me. Oh well, we at least got some good information from the guys, and it was really fun talking modular and gear and big concepts, and I hope you enjoyed listening into our talk. I want to thank the Circuit Jerk guys very much for hanging out and talking. I want to thank you so much for continuing to listen and for keeping up with the various people that I'm able to run across. It's a lot of fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. Feel free to drop me a line. It's darwingross@gmail.com or ddg@cycling74.com. Either of those will get to me. Looking forward to hearing from you for sure. And thanks for listening again. Catch you later. Bye.